And who would you say struggles more? Is it men or women that struggle more with vulnerability? Or would you say it's the same?
Welcome to the Kickass Couples Podcast. This is the place where we help committed couples who want to level up their marriage experience newfound clarity, hope, and confidence. We're Matthew and Kim, co-hosts and husband and wife.
In 26 years together, we've seen a lot and never thought it could be as good as it is right now. We're here to help you successfully navigate the messy, dirty, and wonderful world of marriage.
We believe all couples deserve and are capable of experiencing an extraordinary and fulfilling marriage. And each week, we're bringing you life lessons from real-life successful couples to help you grow and strengthen your relationship.
And now, back to the show.
Are you tired of feeling like your relationship with your partner is stuck in a rut? Do you long for a deeper emotional connection but don't know how to get there? Join Kim and Matthew, along with our panel of experts, as we explore the power of authentic, emotionally rich communication so you can build a strong and intimate bond with your significant other. We are going to cover how you can reignite the spark in your relationship and build a love life that's emotionally fulfilling, physically satisfying, and profound. Dr. Christy Overstreet is a renowned clinical sexologist, psychotherapist, author, speaker, and consultant with over 12 years of experience in transgender healthcare. Dr. Overstreet has written 3 books on relationship communication and is the creator of the Transgender Healthcare Dignity Model Training and Certification Program. Dr. Overstreet is a licensed counselor in California, Florida, Georgia, and Louisiana, and a certified sex therapist and addiction professional. As an elite KCN coach, Dr. Jeff Jennings has helped countless high-achieving professionals, entrepreneurs, and athletes transform their marriage or love relationship. Alongside his lovely wife, Jessica, who is also a licensed marriage therapist, they help bring couples to the greatest marriage ever. His expertise spans interpersonal forgiveness, positive psychology, and the neurobiology of relationships. He leverages cutting-edge neuroscience, attachment research, and positive psychology to help couples achieve deep connection, greater intimacy, and enduring love. His research has been widely published in top psychology journals and books. He holds a PhD in counseling psychology with over 24 years of experience. With a little effort and dedication, your relationship can be full of authentic, vulnerable, and emotionally honest communication, full of joy, fulfillment, and love. So grab your partner and let us guide you on this journey together.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Kickass Couples Podcast. We are excited to be back with a special episode today on the power of vulnerability, how emotional communication can strengthen your relationship. And this is not just Kim and I hanging out in the Airstream. We have got 2 doctors in the house, and we're going to introduce them in just a moment. But, I don't know, Kim, why do so many people get it wrong when it comes to communication? And, you could define effective communication as the process of exchanging ideas, thoughts, opinions, knowledge, and data so that the message is received and understood with clarity and purpose. But I think so many people look at communication as just the data part, and they miss everything else that's around that.
Yeah, there's such an emotional component that goes along with communication. And I think that that's where people get a little confused and it's misunderstood.
Well, we're going to get to the bottom of that today. And joining us today are Dr. Christy Overstreet and Dr. Jeff Jennings, so we can tackle this issue and learn more about what we need to do to get it right. So welcome, good doctors.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome. It's great to have both of you here. I want to open up with a quote from Tony Gaskins that Matthew found, which I really love. And it says, communication to a relationship is like oxygen to life. Without it, it dies. And I feel like that's so true. Such a great quote.
It is. So what do you guys think? Jeff or Dr. Christy, you can go, but what is it why do people get it wrong? Why is this such a troubling issue on being vulnerable in our communication, which is, it seems it's what we want, but what we want and what we do don't always seem to line up?
Well, the biggest thing that I see when it comes to vulnerability is there's this immediate fear. If I'm vulnerable, I'm probably going to get hurt. And so it's really easy to keep our guard up. When it comes to relationships, if we think about being vulnerable just as our ability to be ourselves, to be our authentic selves without getting hurt and feeling safe in that process, we're all trying to get that. We're all wanting that. And the more we can be vulnerable without getting hurt, it will automatically improve the trust in the process. So I think a lot of times we get it backwards. We get in our head when it comes to communication, and we don't get into our bodies, and we're not intentional. And with vulnerability, that will be the only way that we can really connect with our partners. And it doesn't mean that we have to be vulnerable 100% of the time with 100% of what we say. But if we can find bits of vulnerability in our day-to-day, that trust will automatically follow.
That's beautiful. What would you add to that, Jeff? What do you think that vulnerability is such an issue with people being able to do it effectively in their relationships?
I think it has a lot to do with Dr. Christie is talking about that fear, the fear factor. We all want to protect ourselves, and we all want to keep from being hurt. We want to figure out, how can I get my needs met without being hurt in the process? And so we have to learn that the relationship is safe. We have to learn that we can trust our partners with the most vulnerable aspects of ourselves. I think we tend to want to hide vulnerable aspects of ourselves. Research has shown that we like it when we see other people being vulnerable, but we don't like to be vulnerable on our own. So it's a quality that we admire when other people are doing it, but it's seen as a weakness when we ourselves are doing it. So it can be a real challenge to open ourselves up in that way.
And who would you say struggles more? Is it men or women that struggle more with vulnerability? Or would you say it's the same?
I think it really depends on what you're talking about. So I think men and women struggle. I think the stereotype is that women are more vulnerable than men. And that might be true to a degree. And I'd love to hear Dr. Christie's thoughts on this. But I think it depends on the topic, right? I think there are some topics that men struggle with more to be vulnerable, particularly around emotions and things like that. But I also think there are topics and subjects that women struggle to be more vulnerable with.
Yeah, I agree with that. The situation, the topic of the vulnerability. And I think it also, as I'm sure all of y'all would agree, that it's the individual's experience, how they grew up, how have their relationship experience been, their current relationship, the last time they opened up, did they get hurt? Did they get ignored? Did they get dismissed? And those experiences become our own internal messages and teach us, hey, like you said, Dr. Jeff, when this topic comes up, do I sit back in silence or do I go put it all out there? So we have to take the individual, the experience, and what it has been like in that current relationship, which can feel overwhelming because if we think, wait a minute, everything I've been through before makes me who I am today, but it doesn't define who I am today. And I think that's what's so important, whether it's the man or the woman or whoever's in that relationship dynamic, that they're bringing that baggage, that background, their experiences, with also saying, I'm taking a chance and a risk in this situation right now on this topic to put myself out there. Am I going to overcome that fear and just give it a try and see if this time's going to be different? And it's almost feeling like falling off the side of a cliff sometimes, to just put yourself out there. And that's really what the basis of vulnerability is overcoming that fear, whichever person in a relationship it is.
Yeah, I feel like, it's that story, like you said. I appreciate that you said that story that we have in our head about ourselves. And even sometimes I feel like there's this little minion sitting on my shoulder, whispering in my ears, saying really unkind things about myself. And so you're just really repeating those to yourself over and over again and believing those. And it is scary. It does feel like jumping off a cliff when you have to be vulnerable and open. There's a lot of fear surrounding that, I believe.
I agree. So what do we do? Jeff, I'd like to hear from you. So digging deeper a little bit on what Dr. Christie said. So if our history is telling us, hey, don't do this because it could be cataclysmic, right? There's risk. What can we do to allow us to be willing to take more of those steps and be vulnerable in our relationship. Nobody likes to get hurt, right? I mean, the human brain, the human mind, the experience is like protect, nurture, don't do anything that's risky, be safe, play it safe. And that's what vulnerability is, right? Is not being safe and when to get out there. So how do we take that story that we've been hearing that's saying, don't do it, don't jump, don't put yourself out there, you know what's going to happen. What are the things that we can do? And then what are the things that we should ask our partner to do to allow that to be the norm as opposed to the exception?
That's a great question. I think we have to learn that trust, right? And to learn how to trust, we have to take risks. And that can be taking small risks at first. This is what we do in the beginning of the relationship, ideally, right? In the beginning of a relationship, you're taking small risks. You're putting yourself out there little by little to feel out whether or not this person is safe, whether or not this person that I am dating or want to be with in my life is someone that is going to accept me, that is going to validate what I'm feeling or be supportive and be there for me ultimately and accept who I am as a person, right? They can't give us that if we're not willing to take those risks. If a person continues to hide aspects of themselves and not take those risks and not put themselves out there and not be willing to be vulnerable, then they can't possibly ever learn that relationship is safe and the person that they're with is trustworthy. So we have to be willing to take those risks. And if it needs to start in small ways because a person has been deeply wounded in the past and vulnerability is very scary, that's fine. But you have to be willing to take those steps. And in terms of what your partner can do, the other person can do is just really being present. I think that's one of the most important things. When Gottman talks about, bids for connection, John Gottman talks about bids for connection. And when someone makes a bid for connection, their partner has the opportunity to accept or reject that bid. And it's extremely important to recognize and be present when someone is being vulnerable with you, right? And you're being attentive to that and you're listening, you're handling that with care, and you're not ignoring it, checking your phone, going about your business, oh, that's nice, and being dismissive. You really need to pay attention to those moments when someone is taking a risk with you.
Are you tired of feeling like you're living with a roommate instead of a lover? Do you miss the days when you were completely into each other, intellectually, emotionally, and physically? The truth is, many couples are struggling behind closed doors. Putting on a brave face for the rest of the world is exhausting. If you want to get back your joy, return to thriving, and take pleasure in your marriage, then Kickass Couples Coaching and Matthew P. Hoffman are here to help. Join us alone or with your partner and start taking steps towards overcoming the pain-filled obstacles and improving your relationship right now. For a limited time, we're offering a free relationship assessment call. Go to MatthewPHoffman.com/coaching to book your free call now so you can start making real changes in your most important relationship today. Beautiful.
Yeah, so it's up to the partner to create that safe space, to really be aware in that moment of vulnerability in order for the other person to begin to feel safe, is what I hear you saying.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What would you add to that, Dr. Christie?
Another thing that's great suggestions to add to what Dr. Jeff said is to ask both people to redefine intimacy. And what I mean by that is a lot of times we hear intimacy, we automatically think of sex or physical sex. But when we think about intimacy, it really just means connection. And if we're going to connect with someone, we want to build vulnerability with somebody, we want to build trust with them. If we say, if intimacy means connection, and intimacy moves in tandem with trust, then we have the ability to improve trust while building intimacy and connection. So when you're more connected, trust goes up. You can be more vulnerable. And if you feel less connected, trust goes down. And so if we can look at this from saying, am I doing something? Am I acting a certain way? Am I saying something a certain way that's decreasing trust right now? Then I'm automatically going to get less connection, less intimacy, less vulnerability. As redefining intimacy, because there's actually 12 different types of intimacy, and physical intimacy is only one of the 12. But with redefining intimacy, it also gives us the chance to say intimacy and trust go up and down every single day. And we can't have zero trust in a partner and be with them at the same time. Because I think a lot of times in couples, we'll say, well, I don't trust them. And we'll automatically say, well, you got to trust them at least at a 1 out of 10, because if you didn't trust them, you wouldn't be with them in the first place. But are you doing something that is bringing the trust down? Or are you building it back up? So if we can start scaling on a 1 to 10, am I doing something that's increasing trust or decreasing trust? The intimacy and connection, aka the vulnerability, that's the foundation of that, will travel with it. So just rethinking that concept of intimacy, connection, and trust is a great place to start. And extra points if you can actually talk about it and have a conversation about that. Commitment, which I know is important with y'all's pillars, is that commitment to say we're going to redefine intimacy. We're going to change how we're viewing trust, and that will definitely improve vulnerability and intimacy.
I want to dig a little deeper with that. What if I have knowingly or even unknowingly done something to make my partner be afraid to be vulnerable with me? What can I do to repair that? What are some steps that I can take to maybe mend that?
Well, what comes to mind is if you've done something knowingly or unknowingly, trust has absolutely got hit in some way, big or small. And I believe the only two things that you have to improve trust, which means give that chance to kind of get a do-over, is number one, time has to pass, while number two, you're doing the next right thing. So let's say you didn't listen or you didn't show up how you wanted to, or you're late. You start changing that and start more times than not listening, more times than not showing up on time, and start building up this account or this pile of doing the next right thing. But that's not enough. You have to have time pass to show those actions to build up that trust to say, hey, I can be different. I am being different. I'm showing different. Because if it's intentional or if you're aware of it, just saying sorry, hey, I'm sorry about that, that's great. But it's only one part of it. It's showing the actions of doing the next right thing that really makes the biggest difference, which in return will absolutely build trust back.
Love that.
And Dr. Jeff, would you have anything to tag on to those comments about repairing something that's been broken?
Yeah, I think those are great suggestions Dr. Christie has, and I would add, the only thing I would add to that is just really communicating your care and reassurance, right? Yes, it's got to be backed up, right, with action and time and consistency, but sometimes it's also important to start with, hey, you really do matter to me. I messed up, and I am sorry for that, but I want you to know that your feelings matter. What you have to say matters. I want you to be open with me. I want to hear you, and I want to do a better job at that. So I think sometimes we need that reassurance, right? Especially if we have felt hurt or trust has been broken. We can really communicate words of affirmation and reassurance to our partner to help repair.
Sure. And of apology as well, right? I'm sorry. I messed up.
Yeah, not just the word. Chrissy, I love what you said, Dr. Chrissy, about it's not just the words. It's like, when a kid competes in a competition, they go, here's your medal, good job. Good job doesn't mean or do anything, or hey, I'm sorry. And then it's the next right action, which I loved. And it's accountability. I think what I heard both of you saying in your responses is you got to be accountable and own your own stuff, good or bad, and recognize it, and then show, not just say, how you're going to demonstrate and walk through it for your partner. Because if you want the trust high, if you want the vulnerability high, they got to know that you're committed and willing to do what it takes to make them feel safe so that those risks can be taken. And I think that you guys each had some great stuff. So I'm sitting here. I want you guys to consider me. This is vulnerability for dummies. Okay. Third grade. Think that Kim and I are here in the third grade. If I want to be vulnerable with my wife, I'd love for you guys to each walk me through. And Jeff, maybe you can start. What do I got it? What does it look like if I want? I'm sitting here thinking, man, we're not that vulnerable. Our communication is pretty surfacey and data driven, kind of in the definition I was talking about. What are some things that I can do? Give me the startups. What do I say if I'm thinking, holy cow? If our listeners like, okay, I don't have much vulnerability. What's an easy place to start, or what does it look like in conversation?
Mm-hmm. I think of it in terms of levels of intimacy, and Dr. Christie shared, there are actually many different types of intimacy. And I think there are different levels of intimacy when it comes to conversation. So it's one thing to share, your thoughts and opinions with someone. That doesn't require a lot of vulnerability. Most of us are pretty good at sharing our thoughts and opinions with other people, even when they're not wanted.
Yeah, I never do that.
Even
Jeff.
when not
Come on.
solicited.
No way. I'm not guilty.
But it's a different level of intimacy when you start sharing your feelings, right? That requires more vulnerability. And not just like, oh, I'm really upset about this thing that happened with me today, right? It's really sharing the softer emotions, right? That's another thing that's easy to share when we're angry or upset or frustrated, But when we can really start sharing the softer emotions, I felt really hurt by this individual today, or I felt rejected, or I felt a sense of shame when this happened to me, or when I did this, or I felt afraid. This scared me. Um, that is that's extending another level of trust. When we can share that softer emotion, where we are more vulnerable, right? That makes us more vulnerable to share that, and those are the things that are often seen as weakness. So those are the things we don't want to share. So one of the first things you can do, I think, is just start being really honest about your feelings. And sometimes that requires some emotional awareness, right? We need to tune in to our own inner life and what we're feeling. And I work with a lot of men who struggle with this, who come to see me because they have a difficult time sharing their feelings with their wives, and their wives feel very disconnected from them. And it impacts their children as well, so they want to strengthen those relationships. And we start with simply them starting to tune in to their own emotions and grow in their own emotional awareness, and then being willing to share that with the people in their lives.
Love that. So as a man in this relationship, I hear sharing softer emotions, things which make me a little bit vulnerable. How do I feel? What did a situation look like? And then for my partner, her being encouraging and accepting and not judgmental of that. Because if I'm stepping out there, she's making it safe, acknowledging. And, I shared something just to give a personal example. Last night, I kind of did a mea culpa with Kim on a mistake I had made that had financial repercussions to our family. Thank goodness I caught it. But I did something and I took care of it and handled it, and it went away. And I sat there yesterday afternoon thinking, okay, I can share this with her and really open myself up and say I screwed up, but I also fixed it, or I could say nothing. And I chose to walk through the door and be vulnerable. And we were making dinner last night, and I said, hey, I got a mea culpa, and her eyes got really big, like, oh no, what's coming down the pike, right? What'd you do? But I shared it and I explained it to her, and she wasn't judgmental. She heard me and she said, wow, da 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 da. And we had a great conversation, but it was my choice to share something with her that cast me in a negative light and made me feel a certain way. So I shared my emotion, I shared what I did, and we had a connection opportunity. And I didn't get hurt. Yes, it was not fun to say I made a mistake and I screwed up, but I was willing to have the conversation, which brought us closer together. And I think those are the conversations that people can be having. What would you add to that, Christy? If it's vulnerability for idiots, and we're sitting here, and I want to be more vulnerable with my wife, what would you add to what Jeff has already shared with us?
Would y'all be open to doing this real time as the couple sitting there?
Absolutely.
Okay, so go ahead. So as you're listening, what's happening right now is I'm asking Matthew and Kim to look at one another. I know it's tough because I want you to have good audio to be able to talk, but I want you to just look at each other as comfortable as you can. I want you to touch in some place, whether it's hands, somehow touch in some way. All right, now look at one another. And what I would do for time purposes, on mine, I would time you for about 1.5 minutes to just look into one of those other's eyes. We're not timing right now. We'll do it quicker. So just look at one another. We'll take a couple of moments. And Matthew, while you're looking at Kim, I want you to tell her what led you to choose her. What led you to choose her out of all the other women in the world? Just tell her right now in the moment. First thing that comes to mind.
Tell her, one of the most,
I choose you.
Oh, you. I choose you because you are one of the most spirit-led, faithful, loving, and genuine women I've ever met.
Okay. Kim, what led you to choose him out of all the men in the world? Why Matthew?
I choose you because you are the most incredible human I have ever met. You are deeply spiritual, you are kind, you are considerate, and you are committed to our covenant of marriage.
Okay. Now, Matthew, while you're looking at Kim, I want you to tell her, what is the biggest thing within you and your relationship that you are continuing to work on and committing to her to work on? Just right now in the moment, what comes up for you?
I am continuing to work on valuing your strengths, your unique approach, and your dedication to our family so that I can better support you and your success.
Okay. Kim, tell Matthew what you're committed to work on, like the biggest thing that you want to work on right now within yourself and the relationship.
I am committed to prioritizing you above all others, all human relationships, that is, and making sure that you know and feel that you are number one in my life and that I am going to strive every day to make you feel that way.
Okay. Now, go ahead and you can break your eye contact or as you talk about this right now. Matthew, what's coming up for you right now as she was telling you those things about why you were important, why she chose you, and then hearing what she's working on. Tell her what feeling's coming up for you right now in the moment.
It's reaffirming. It's confirming because I don't want to say it's nothing new that I didn't know, but it focuses and puts me at ease to know what she's doing for me and why she chooses me. So I feel at ease, comfort, committed, and supported, and I would say emboldened to go forward in what I need to do for me and for us in our relationship.
Okay. Kim, how about for you? When you were looking at him and he was telling you why you and then what he's wanting to work on, what did that bring up for you?
It made me feel valued and made me feel appreciated and truly loved by him. I think that it again was reaffirming, as you said, about how he feels about me and how important I am in his life.
So both of y'all were very vulnerable with each other, but most definitely all of us listening, right? And you both took away the affirmation, the recommitment, the reaffirming, saying, hey, I'm on the right path within my relationship. Phew, thank goodness I'm on the right path. They are too, which shows, Dr. Jeff, what you were saying earlier about that affirmation, that reminding, that support. And that can give so much trust, which absolutely encourages more and more vulnerability. So good job for both of y'all for opening up and letting us be vulnerable with y'all. But that simple, and I say simple, meaning you both do great with taking directions and putting yourself out there, but just taking the 5 minutes to remind one another of why they're important and then what your accountability, personal responsibility, relationship, what you're bringing to the table, that's going to make you want to share and open up more and more and gives more peace. So that is something everyone can do if you have the space and the emotional place within your relationship to start building up more of that.
Great.
I want to dive a little deeper with both of you into emotional communication, because we've talked about communication and we know that that's exchanging data, but when we talk more about emotional communication, I think it goes a lot deeper than just being really honest about your feelings, right? It's about putting your feelings out there, but also knowing what those underlying emotions and feelings are that are driving that. And so if we talk about emotional communication, what are some of what does it look like? What are some, what would you say emotional communication looks like between two people? And I would ask you, Dr. Jeff, if you don't mind going first.
Sure, I'll jump in. To me, yeah, it does go beyond just sharing I feel a certain way. To me, that real deep emotional communication really has to do with sharing your inner world, right? Like really what is your struggles, your fears, your hopes, your dreams, your aspirations. What's happening for you right now in your life? What are you struggling with right now in your inner life? What challenges are you having? What's on your mind? What's on your heart? Right? These are the types of things that really require a high degree of vulnerability because you're really revealing yourself to another person. You're really letting them in, right? And that's not something we do with everybody. So it does require a great degree of trust and safety, and needs to be handled with care. But that is where we can deepen our intimacy the most, is by going to those places of vulnerability, by just revealing our true selves, in our inner world with our partner.
Sure. And with some people, there could be past trauma, in their history, some things that are really difficult to speak about. And so I appreciate that you said that. Would you add anything on to that, Dr. Christie?
Yeah, I think to add on, I think something that we don't talk a lot about is having the space to have emotional communication, meaning I'll share with what my partner and I do. And when I work with individuals and couples, is first off, just asking, hey, do you have a couple of minutes? Or, hey, do you have some time? I need to talk about this or get this off my chest or run something past you real quick, or I want to talk with you about this, and waiting for your partner to say, yeah, I got a couple of minutes, or actually not right now. I can't even chat with you right now. Let's do a little bit later. And if they do say, yeah, I've got a couple of minutes, saying, okay, dumping out whatever's going on, sharing whatever you need, and your partner's ability to call it holding space, to be able to hold space just for you to talk, to share, to dump, to vent, to just put everything out there without them jumping in and trying to fix it. Because I'm sure it's really easy, right, to jump in and try to start solving. But I know with my partner, for his ability to say, okay, I can hold space for you and you can dump it out, and he's not jumping in and interrupting. He'll wait till I get done and say, did you want me to share my thoughts? And I may say, no, I'm good. Or, yeah, what do you think? Versus jumping in and cutting off the conversation. Because when we have the safety of being able to dump or share or talk without someone interrupting us or jumping in with their agenda, we're able to get deeper. And we're also able to really work through whatever's coming up for us at the moment. So with both partners, just to be able to check in and say, do you have a couple of minutes? I need to talk and share. And then if the other partner says yes, for them not to jump in is really important. So some of the emotional communication, we have to hold space for being able to allow the person to talk and share versus just really dominating the conversation.
Are you struggling to maintain the emotional and physical intimacy you once shared? Do you feel like you're spending more energy finding fault and tearing your partner down instead of magnifying their good and building them up? Don't worry, you're not alone. Many couples are struggling behind a forced smile and an inauthentic happiness. You feel drained, unheard, and more often than not, unappreciated. The good news is it's not too late to rekindle the flame and strengthen your bond. I'm offering a free relationship assessment call to help you take the first step towards revitalizing your relationship and reaching your own relationship nirvana. Whether you come alone or with your partner, I'm here to help you create the space for a more fulfilling and satisfying relationship. Don't wait any longer. Make the changes you need to thrive. Book your free call today at matthewphoffman.com/coaching. And let's get started on your journey to a kick-ass relationship.
Right. And I would agree with that. If we don't create the space or make sure the timing is right, then we could really be putting ourselves in a challenging position. Because what if that person's tired? What if they're hungry? What if they're just not in a great mood? So making sure that that person is available and ready to have that conversation, I think is key.
It is. And I think another thing that we've talked about before that I want to bring up, because I think it's germane, is when you're talking to your partner and they say, hey, and Dr. Christie, that request comes, hey, do you have a few minutes? Ask them what it is they're looking for. Say, hey, tell me what you're looking for right now. Is it a listening ear? Do you feel like just venting? Is there an issue? In other words, how do you want me to best support you in this conversation? Instead of guessing, because maybe they are looking for a solution like, I don't know what to do and I really need some feedback. Or, know what? I'm angry and I just need to vent. So knowing how you need to listen and be there for them, it's good to know so that you're not, because more often than not, it's not a solution, but sometimes I'm faced with this and I just don't know what to do. Or if you're just being quiet and they're looking for that help, then, and you're not saying anything, it's going to be frustration. So how can I show up best for you right now? Great question. Just need you to listen. I want to vent. I'm looking for help. I'm looking for feedback, or I'm angry and I just got to get this out there. So I think there's nothing wrong with asking your partner, how can I best respond? Just shut up and listen. You got it. Here we go. I'll shut up and listen. Right. And for men, and I won't say all men, but a lot of men typically want to get in, repair, fix, and move on. It's like, what can I do quick to get out there? And I had to really learn in our relationship, it's not about being expedient. It's about being present. I think, Jeff, you said that earlier. And I think that's important. And, that kind of leads into, in our society, it seems, our communities and society and social media, are they encouraging a greater expression of vulnerability, or do you feel like they're not? When we think about society or relationships and community or work, what do you think the trend is, and how can we best respond to those trends or pressures that are out there right now? And Dr. Christie, I'd love to hear from you first on that.
Yeah, I think it is encouraging us to be more vulnerable because we're putting ourselves out there more than ever, especially with social media and being encouraged and affirmed to say what we think, share our opinions, put ourselves out there. Where the problem comes in if we find that we're putting ourselves all the way out there for everybody else, but not within our relationship. And I think that's what one of the problems can be too, is people are showing up in spaces, but not showing up for themselves first, because you got to take care of yourself first to show up for your part of the relationship. And social media can be a real problem, as y'all all know, for a lot of relationships and probably a lot of ways. And so I think if we just make that commitment that I'm going to show up, I'm going to be vulnerable. I owe this to myself and I owe this to the relationship. I can't get what I want unless I give what I want. It's like this dance of giving and getting and keeping a lot of relationship equality. But yeah, I mean, again, I think a lot of people are quicker to put themselves out there on a Facebook status or share like an update of Facebook versus having a conversation with their partner, because they don't have to be super vulnerable as they would have to be deep down with their partner.
Right. What would you add to that, Jeff? Any more?
I agree. I think with our current, culture and with social media, we're certainly encouraged to share more information with one another. So we put a lot more information out there for lots of people to see. But it's sort of like, that degree of anonymity, I mean, even though people know who we are, it's like, it's easy to share things when there is a distance between us and those who are receiving it, right? There's a little bit of distance there. It doesn't it doesn't make us feel quite as vulnerable. Some things can, depending on what we're sharing, but it is very different than actually having a conversation face to face with someone. I think it's a very different thing. I think it's It's a harder thing, more challenging to be truly vulnerable with someone face to face than it is to share very vulnerable things, on, Facebook or something like that.
Right.
Dr. Jeff, we're talking about being vulnerable and using really emotional communication. What happens when we do that in a relationship, when we show up that way in a relationship? What are some of the outcomes? I would love for our listeners to hear that.
I think, ideally, and I think it happens more often than not, is that it bonds us to the other people. It builds connection. Other people feel closer to us. They feel more connected to us. It encourages them to be more vulnerable, right? With us. So they might open up and share more when they know that we're willing to be vulnerable. So it really starts to build a closer and more intimate bond. That can be with a friend or a romantic partner or whatever, but it's going to build that relationship and make it stronger more often than not. I worked with college students for a number of years at the University of Virginia, and being sharing a struggle or sharing what was really going on with them was like death. Right, that was the worst thing they could imagine. They would come into the counseling center, and I would sit with them and talk with them, and they would share these things with me that they were struggling with, and I would always ask, who else have you talked to about this? And the answer almost always was no one. Right? Well, what about your friends? Do you have friends? Oh, yeah, I have friends. And do you talk to them about this sort of thing? Oh, no, we never talk about stuff like this, right? So what part of my work was oftentimes just to get them to share with another person, right? Because I knew that they needed that experience of being able to share a struggle with someone and not feel rejected. And it was a risk, right? But 90 times out of 100, when they actually did it, they came back and reported that it was a very positive experience. That when they shared, when they were more vulnerable and shared something with a friend of theirs, their friend was supportive, was encouraging. Their friend may have shared something they were struggling with. So generally, when we are vulnerable and we take that risk, it is going to be reciprocated in a positive manner, that it's going to have a positive impact on the relationship.
Great.
And do you have anything to add on to that, Dr. Christy?
Well, the biggest thing with better communication is we feel more emotionally intimate within the relationship dynamics, and we feel more emotional intimate, we're going to have more physical intimacy. And when we have more physical intimacy, we're going to feel closer, which is going to build up more of that emotional intimacy. And I think one thing we may get wrong at times is we hear emotional intimacy and we think it's all about having to share all the emotions all the time and say how we feel all the time. But being able to sit silent with someone and just be able to hold space without having to feel the time and just knowing that you're there with them, that has a big impact on that relationship connection as a whole. But yeah, communication intimacy absolutely results in emotional and physical intimacy.
Sure. So I've got a final question for you guys. You've been fantastic with your responses, and man, so much good stuff for our listeners. But what do you say to the person who's like, you know what? I don't feel we've got the emotional communication intimacy that we have, and I'm really down with this. I'm working on it. But you've got the partner who's like, are you kidding me? Either not willing, doesn't want to, doesn't know how to, or you're getting the stiff arm from your partner who doesn't want to go there. How does somebody approach a partner who either isn't there or doesn't want to go there so you can have those discussions and hopefully work on repairing and getting more strength there? And I'd love to hear from both of you on that. And so, Dr. Christy, how does somebody approach an unwilling partner in this area?
I'd start by saying, hey, I see where you're at from what you're doing or not doing. I need to tell you where I'm at. I can only work on me. I can't fix or change you. So I'm going to keep growing and changing. I hope you decide to go along with this with me. And for the individual that is willing to do the work and wanting to do the work, what you're doing is you're checking boxes. You're checking boxes that I'm doing all I can do. I'm doing all I have control over. I'm seeing what are my wants, needs, and desires, and I hope they align with the relationship. And once you go through and check the boxes that you've done everything that you can, and you go back to your partner and say, hey, I've done all I can do, you may have to make some really tough decisions about the relationship. And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. They're at this crossroads. Do I go? Do I stay? So what I would encourage them to do is say, have I done all that I can do within my power? And when you get to that point, you got some difficult decisions to make. But the hope is when you work, you change, you do you and grow, everything around you will change. It doesn't mean that person will change, but it's the best likelihood to see some type of change by modeling and being you to see where they're at with their growth.
Sure. That's great. What would you add to that, Jeff, to the person who's like, I'm in, I see it, I value it, but man, I'm hitting brick walls when I approach my partner?
Right. Yeah, I think it's really important to communicate the need and to communicate why it's important to you. You know, I need more emotional intimacy in our relationship. I need you to be more vulnerable with me, and here's why that's important to a relationship, you know, and to our relationship in particular. So being honest and genuine, you know, about your needs and why you need that and what it would mean to the relationship to have that reciprocated, and also what it's going to mean for the relationship to not have that reciprocated. Because I think you can be honest and say, you know, hey, what we're doing now is no longer working, right? This is just not working anymore. And I see lots of couples who have been married decades, right? And the kids are now grown and have now left the house, and they find themselves very disconnected from one another. And they realize, all right, we were able to kind of mask this for many years while we were raising kids, but we can't mask it any longer, and this is actually a problem, and it needs to be addressed. And so, you know, I think it's one of the reasons why you see couples, you know, you do see divorce rates go up some after children leave the home, right? Because if they haven't maintained a good emotional connection through those child rearing years, and then they're unable or unwilling to after the children leave, the relationship's not going to be sustainable.
Love that. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I think overall we've learned today that our emotional communication really can build stronger bonds. It can increase our understanding of our partner's inner world and their hopes and their dreams. You know, it can really help unify our relationship and really work within us when we're pressured or have outside stressors. You know, it can definitely have an impact on those things as well. And I think it also gives us a better opportunity to communicate at work with our children when we have learned how to emotionally be vulnerable with our partner. So
Yeah.
thank you both so much.
You guys have been great. So if people want to learn more about you, Dr. Christy, if they want to connect and get more of your goodness, where should they go?
They can either find me on Instagram at Dr. Christy Overstreet or on Facebook, same handle, or on my website, drchristyoverstreet.com, and sign up for my weekly fix email.
Weekly fix. I think we could all use that.
Exactly.
How about you, Dr. Jeff? If people want to learn more about you or connect with you, where should they go?
They could go to my website as well. It's drjeffjennings.com. My wife and I also do marriage work together, coaching together, and that's at www.greatestmarriageever.com. So either one of those could be places they could find me.
Great. Well, this has been a fantastic discussion. Lots of good stuff, and we hope our listeners have a better roadmap of how to navigate this. And we are so grateful for your input. And we always like to close by reminding you that
Happily ever after doesn't just happen, it's on purpose.
Thanks for being with us today. We look forward to connecting soon, guys.
Take care.
Thank you for having us.
That's all we've got for this episode of the Kickass Couples Podcast. If you like the content of this show, you'll love Matthew's newly released book, Kickass Husband, Winning at Life, Marriage, and Sex. To receive a digital mini book of quotes and images from the book, all you have to do is rate this show and leave a review in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you tune in to listen. Then email us a screenshot of your review at podcast@kickasscouplespodcast.com, and we'll get it over to you right away. Until next time, remember, happily ever after doesn't just happen, it's on purpose.